Democracy is never more than one generation away from extinction. Now, these are the wise words of former President Ronald Reagan. Now, when President Reagan said these words, he wasn't talking about a democracy falling apart in one night or in one election, but simply over time, when young people started to not understand, to protect, or preserve it. Now, you see, a lot of older folks, like sitting in the audience today, they look at young people and they say, "You are the future of democracy. It is your job to protect it." But that really sparks the question that I have to talk about today, is how can we protect and preserve something we were never truly taught to understand? You see, I think human nature is pretty simple. We care about what affects us, right? Let me give you a quick example. 2 years ago at Oaks Christian School, something of the banning of skirts happened, right? Me and my friends sitting in the back, none of us cared, right? It didn't affect our daily lives at all. But the young Lady Lions could not say the same thing. They were very frustrated. They were very upset. And why? Because it impacted their everyday lives. It impacted them so much that they actually started petitions. They garnished hundreds of signatures, and they tried to make change. In the same way that when I go to Chipotle and my $12 bowl is all of a sudden $18. It's ridiculous, right? And for me, this does impact my everyday life because I go to Chipotle about every single day. Now, in the same way that this makes me upset, it makes a lot of people upset because the truth about human nature is that we care about what affects us. Now, I think it's important to understand that democracy is the same way. Now, Ronald Reagan was not the first person to have concerns about how to strengthen, protect, and preserve democracy, and I'm certainly not the last, and neither of us are the first. So let's go and look at some history to ground this talk in today of some other philosophers from ancient Greece that also had ideas of how to protect and to preserve democracy. So first, let's start with Socrates. Now, Socrates was a pretty simple man, but a brilliant one. I'm sure that we have all been in school or just heard online about Socrates and some of his philosophy. You see, Socrates believed that voting was not an innate right, but that voting was a skill. Now, I don't stand here in front of you and tell you that voting is not an innate right, because I do believe it is, but it definitely is a skill. You see, Socrates gave an example and a metaphor, and it went like this. Imagine you were stranded in the open sea. You had two options for who was going to take you back to shore. Option A was a trained salesman, a trained captain of a boat who had practiced and experienced all his life. And option B was a man that worked in a candy shop, a man that had no experience and who had never even been in the ocean before. Now, what option would we choose, the experienced person or the inexperienced person? Right? We all shout out experienced person. This is because it's pretty simple. They're educated, they're practiced, they're licensed, and they have the best chance of getting us back safely. Now, Socrates believed that it was important to connect this back to everyday life, and so this is what we come of it, right? We have this idea that democracy is a ship, it is a vessel, it is our means of transportation. In a government for the people, by the people, we are the captains of our ship, and if we want to be good captains, good people guiding our democracy in the right way, it's also important we are educated. Just like in the metaphor, we would choose an educated person to drive the ship, we should also have an educated person and choose to be educated people when it comes to our democracy. Now let's jump to Plato, because I read a book by Plato called The Republic that went all over his philosophy, and I took away one key thing, and it was this. People often choose what sounds good over what is good. It's very simple that a lot of the time in human history and throughout history, we have seen that a lot of the time people choose what sounds good in theory, but isn't always good in reality. What makes it sound good doesn't always make it good, and we see this a lot play out through history. I think the most famous example of what Plato was talking about was, let's look at Nazi Germany in 1939. I think it's very important to understand what was happening in Nazi Germany prior to what happened in World War II. I think it's important to understand, number one, that Nazi Germany was a democracy, and I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't understand and they mess up. Hitler was a democratically appointed leader, and I think that is the first major thing to understand. Now, I think the second major thing to understand is that what was actually happening in Germany in this time of 1939. The first thing is that they were coming off World War I, right? They were poor. They were in a Great Depression. They were a laughingstock. Now, a man like Adolf Hitler rose up in a democracy, and he was very persuasive. He charged his speeches with emotions and with passion, and it really convinced people under the ideas of fascism and supranationalism, right? And people bought into this. But why? This is because it sounded so good. Plato believed that humans innately, emotion could really strive people to make things sound good when they really weren't. And so what do we see? We see Adolf Hitler rise to power, become the dictator, and turn this democracy into an autocracy. Now, what are the consequences of times in history where we see uneducated people, people vulnerable to manipulation in a democracy? Well, we see exactly with this. What are the real world consequences of a time when democracy fails because people become uneducated? Well, the problem is, and the consequences are, for myself personally, as my great-great-grandmother was shot in the back of the head on the way to a concentration camp in 1939 during World War II, along with 6 million other Jews and other members that were killed. And like my grandma would say, who's sitting in the back today, we must never forget. Now, these atrocities are horrible and are really what happens when a democracy becomes uneducated and vulnerable to manipulation. Now, I think it's important to see in this situation that we see throughout history time and time again of these things happening, and we also see what happens, we see the real world consequences that happen to everybody, but also what happened to Germany. Because Germany lost another world war, became even poorer, even more of a laughingstock, and overall what sounded really, really good turned out to be one of the most catastrophic things to happen in human history. Now let's move on. This is John Adams, the second president of the United States. Now, John Adams, similarly to me and probably similarly to you, believed that young people needed to be educated. And so, what happened? He created the school system we have today. But that is the key word in that phrase, that we have today. Let's look at an example of what I mean by that, right? What is that? That is the question that I asked 5 years ago when I was at the mall with my brother and my dad. I was out of Foot Locker, and I was like, Dad, what is that on that wall? Like, there was a yellow shoe, and this thing was next to it. I was like, what the heck is that? And apparently, this is how people used to listen to music 20 years ago, right? Now, this is how we listen to music today. Apple Music and Spotify, right? Where instantly we click and it's there, right? That's just one example. Let's look at another one. This is how, actually, when I say this, I mean, this is how people used to listen to music 20 years ago, right? It just looks so old. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry. All right, now let's move on, right? This is how people used to travel 150 years ago, by horseback. This is how people travel today, by cars, modern technology, and advancements. This is what a school looked like 150 years ago. And this is what a school looks like today. The exact same. We see advancements in music, in iPhones, in cars, but fundamentally the school system is the exact same. And it's interesting because when I go to school, I take an English class and I learn how to write CEWs and I learn different fallacies and aphoras and epizeuxis and all those different things. I go to math class and I learn cosine and tangent and the unit circle and pre-calc and all those different things. And I go to science class and chemistry and I learn about the periodic table and molar masses and all those different things. And those things are important, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they aren't. But what is the one thing that we never truly really get to take the time to question, to understand, to challenge, and really connect to? It's our government. It's our democracy. The core pillar of what we have in America is our democracy, is our government, and yet at max, students only spend 1 year ever understanding it. And I think the one thing that really is missed when we are learning about our government is this, is that everything around us in our everyday life connects directly back to democracy and our government. But a lot of us don't see that. A lot of young people don't understand that, and I'm going to get to that in just a moment. But let's move on. Don't just take my word for it. We see some historical examples, but let's look at some stats. In 2022, an Annenberg survey found that less than half of Americans could name all 3 branches of government. 1 out of every 2 people could not name the 3 branches of government. At that, they found that 25% of people could not name a single one of the 3 branches of government. They also found in another study done by ACTA that only 32% of students correctly could identify Congress as the branch with the power to declare war. Now, what is the issue with this? The issue is that these young people that are in high school, they interviewed 3,000 students. These 3,000 students are going to grow up one day to be the politicians, the doctors, the teachers, and all those different things. They are the next generation. But what type of world and democracy are we living in when these young people don't even know who has the power to declare war? When any person could step into office, any position of power, and declare war if they choose so, and nobody would question it because they wouldn't know who really has the power to do so. It's also true if we look at more of a local level. In the state of California, young adults ages 18 to 34 make up 30% of California's population, but only 21% of likely voters. Through these 2 stats, we see 2 major things. 1, young people are not educated. And 2, because they are not educated, we see drops in participation. Lower than any other age group, young people consistently aren't showing up and turning out in voting. Now let me tell you a quick story. My friend had just turned 18 in the last election, and he went to the ballot box, and he was super, super excited. I'm 18, I'm ready to vote, I know who my president's gonna be, we're gonna rock the world, all of the jazz, right? He gets in the ballot box, and this is what he sees, right? He sees this first column, he sees who his president's gonna be, and he checks it off. And then his jaw drops to the floor. He has never seen a single thing on this ballot ever before in his life. And out of his obligation to be an American citizen who has to vote, he just starts checking off boxes and checking off boxes. Now, what is the consequence of when something like this happens? Well, I'm not sure how many of us remember, but back in 2016, there was a bill, Proposition number 67, that was on the ballot. No pun intended. It was number 67. Now, on this ballot in Proposition number 67, it was something that went like this. It was about the banning of 10 cents per plastic bag in the state of California. Now, many people went to the ballot box, just like my friend, and didn't know anything, and just started checking off boxes. But what we see comes of that is something like Proposition 67, something that hurts everybody's everyday life, right? 10 cents per plastic bag is ridiculous. It's crazy. Now, this isn't something that is life or death, but this is just an example of something that can happen, right? Because what did happen in this situation? Well, the politicians used very tricky wording, very manipulative wording that made people that didn't know anything about this proposition not understand it. When they voted yes to the bill, they thought they were voting no against it, and when they were voting no, they thought they were voting yes for it. Many people came out afterwards and were very upset. They felt tricked, bamboozled. They felt like a fool because they voted for something that hurt their everyday life. Now, this is a micro-level situation, right? 10 cents per plastic bag for most people isn't life or death. But what happens when this type of situation is escalated to a macro-level situation, where we have examples of time and time again through history, where we have a Nazi Germany, or we have an Athens fall, or a Greek democracy fall, right? We see these different things. This is a small level of what can happen, but just on a much larger scale. Now, we see a problem. We see people warning us about an issue. We see the issue in the stats. We see the issue through Proposition number 67. So what is the solution? Because I think the main issue is that young people don't understand how the government and how democracy and how civics connects to everyday life, right? All of these things up on this board right here. Unemployment rates, taxes, gas prices, college tuition. How many of us right now, when we go to fill up our car at the gas stations, we're really feeling it in our pockets? I know my dad is, with me and my brother driving and him paying for our gases. I'm sure that he is feeling that, right? How many of us are feeling these college tuition prices? Some of us in this room are going to be going off to college next year. Some of us are going to be going in 2 or 3 years. And we're going to see just how big those numbers are, and our parents are definitely going to see that too. Now, I think the main thing to understand is that when you look at these things, you might see, oh, unemployment rates, gas prices, college tuition, and you might think, yes, those things connect to the government. But most young people don't. They never see or understand that all of these things that contribute to every single day of every single life are all affected by the government, by what's going on foreign, by what's going on with our own politics, by how our politicians are acting. Now, I think the major thing is that if they understood how these things impacted their lives, they would begin to care. I was very fortunate enough to have a person and somebody like Mrs. On, who sits in this room today, that I was able to take a debate class, and I was able to learn all about the different things on this board and how they connect to my life and how democracy is the fundamental core of our life. But not everybody is as fortunate enough as me to have somebody like Mrs. On. But I think that everybody should. I think that everyone should have someone, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a parent, whether it's a coach, whether it's a mentor, whoever it is. Someone should be able to teach them that all of these things in everyday life connect directly back to democracy, back to our government. Because just like I was once uneducated and I didn't care about these things, once I learned how they connected to my life, instantly it changed. Instantly I wanted to know more. Instantly I wanted to learn about the government, and I was on YouTube watching videos, and it has changed my whole perspective into one day wanting to be a politician. I think that is the key thing to understand, is that if young people were taught how these things connected to their life, they would begin to care. Now, my dad once shared with me a quote by Albert Einstein. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. You see, we can't sit back and just do the same thing over and over again. We see the numbers. We can't just sit back and think one day the numbers will flip. Young people will begin to become educated one day and care about democracy, because that's not the case. It would actually fit under the definition of insanity. We need to take action. We need to understand there is a problem, and there are real-world threats and consequences we have seen throughout history when we don't take the problem serious and we don't educate our young people in the future of our democracy. Bad things happen. Real consequences come from it. And it is time that we do something. Because If we do believe that when Ronald Reagan once said, democracy is only one generation away from extinction, then it is also true the opposite. If democracy is one generation away from extinction, democracy is also one generation away from renewal. Thank you very much.